Hello and welcome to another celebration of the history that makes our homes so special. These are the unknown stories of Western New York. And we begin with the story of a man who has witnessed and made a whole lot of history himself. A member of the greatest generation who just marked his 100th birthday on Pearl Harbor Day. December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, which also happened to be George Moriel's 16th birthday.
I came home from the movies that day, and my mother said the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. She said, but you're all right, you're only 16.
But 2 years later, it was a very different story.
And then when I was 18, I received a draft card, and they wouldn't let me finish high school. I had 2 more months to go.
And away he went, ultimately being sent to Glasgow, Scotland, en route to Bastogne and the Battle of the Bulge.
They told me, you had to do this, you got to do that. Didn't give too much time to concentrate to realize what I was getting into.
And on his 19th birthday, George and his 83rd Infantry Unit of the 3rd Army were committed to battle.
We were marching toward the front lines, and I saw men in my division. The lieutenant, I knew him real well, and he had bleeding from his side. And he said to me, George, get rid of your backpack, get rid of everything but your rifle, your canteen, and your ammunition. So we went to battle.
And even today, 80 years later, the emotions of war are still very raw.
I was in a foxhole for 7 days and 7 nights. I froze my feet, my hands, my ears were white. And after the sun broke, our airplanes were able to hit the tanks and the Germans retreated.
That morning when you're in the foxhole and you finally see the sun, I mean, did that feel like a gift from God?
Yeah.
By that time, his feet were so swollen from frostbite that his boots needed to be cut off.
So then they sent me to a farmhouse where medics were, and they looked at me and they said, you're going home.
He came home with several medals and commendations, including the Combat Infantry Badge, the Bronze Star, and the European Theater Medal, things that at the time he didn't even want to look at. He just wanted to get back to his life before the war. He finished high school, took a job as a draftsman for the city of Niagara Falls, eventually became the city engineer and the director of public works for a record 12 years.
And I retired in 1984. I've been retired longer than I worked. I've been retired 41 years. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I beat the system.
And he beat Father Time. He still lives alone and is very active in keeping up with family and friends, including his neighbor, Assemblyman Angelo Morinello, who stopped by with a gift during our interview.
Yep. And on behalf of the New York State Assembly, I want to present you with a proclamation highlighting your life, highlighting the Battle of the Bulge, all your service, your school, and everything you have done for the community.
Thank you,
God bless
Angelo.
you, George.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, George, the man known to many as the unofficial mayor of Niagara Falls. And now we are celebrating the contributions of another World War II veteran who came to Western New York and laid down some roots, quite literally. Like a fine wine, this Chautauqua County landmark has improved with age.
And this is what the house looked like back then.
The property itself is loaded with history. The house, built in 1822 by a land surveyor for the Holland Land Company named William Peacock. In 1908, the Johnson family comes into the picture. Frederick Johnson, an English orphan who immigrated to Canada, then found his way to Cornell University, bought the estate, and planted fruit trees and conquered grapes. He built an apple cold storage building and then built a family. His son, Frederick Spencer, grew up on the farm and followed in Dad's footsteps to Cornell, and then World War II called.
So he goes off to Pensacola, becomes a torpedo bomber pilot, out to the fleet in 1943 with the 2nd Yorktown, wins a Distinguished Flying Cross for sinking a destroyer on Veterans Day, 1944, off the Philippines.
The war hero ultimately graduated from Cornell and went to work overseas for Nelson Rockefeller's agricultural companies. But soon enough, he was called back to the farm and became a pioneer.
1961, my grandfather, my father's father, dies. And so father leaves that, comes back here, and turns the Apple Cold Storage building into a winery.
A pioneer of winemaking. He became the first farmer in western New York to plant French wine grapes in a region dominated at the time by juice grapes. Current winemaker Jeffrey Murphy says the region is perfect for wine.
Combination of, natural irrigation, natural air movement, and the lake provides us with this giant heat sink so our grapes can ripen fully.
In 2010, Frederick Johnson Jr. returned home and became the third generation.
And so now we have 13 varieties, and we make over 45 wines from those varieties of grapes.
He and his wife Jennifer now oversee the oldest continuously operating estate winery in New York State. And now the Johnson name collects medals of a different kind.
We consider ourselves stewards. We are the third generation, but we appreciate we won't be here forever. And so we're stewards of this place, trying to make it a little better each day. And I laughingly say being outside here is nature therapy.
And from the southern tier to the northern tier, and a little hike along the Niagara Gorge trails, trails that are also pathways to history. Now, the unknown story of the long-lost Niagara Gorge Railroad. For 40 years, it was one of Niagara's biggest attractions.
If you were an adventure seeker and you were looking for a thrill ride, you'd come to Niagara Falls and hop on the Niagara Great Gorge Route trolley.
And bits of it are still visible today. Most of the Gorge Trail system, for example. Plus these foundations for a bridge which once spanned this ravine at Art Park.
There was a station in Niagara Falls, New York, and then it would go across the suspension bridge, come down the Canadian side along where the parkway would be today, across the Lewiston-Queenston suspension bridge to Lewiston, and then back to Niagara Falls. So it was an international loop.
And an international draw.
A lot of people at the time thought it was more fun than looking at the falls itself.
The thrills even attracted a president.
It could accommodate up to 17,000 people a day, and it did. It was capacity.
Yes, that's William McKinley on September 6, 1901. He spent the morning riding the train on the U.S. side before headed back to Buffalo. Yes, that was the same day he was gunned down at the Pan Am Exposition.
It was a ride of a lifetime. If you survived, the fact is that by 1917, 25 people had already died on the ride.
The train ride itself was mired with derailments that led to several drownings in the rapids.
You had a sheer cliff on one side, you had the rapids that you could practically hold your hand out and touch on the other, and it was just so exciting people couldn't help themselves.
And ultimately, it was the terrain that did the Niagara Gorge line in, as a rock slide took out about 200 feet of tracks. Its last run, September 17th, 1935. 90 years ago this past fall. Up next on the Unknown Stories of Western New York, the connection between the Haudenosaunee and the U.S. Constitution, celebrating the medicine game, and a look back at when professional hockey came to North Tonawanda. Welcome back. It is a document that's cited more than any other, the U.S. Constitution. But what you may not realize is the fact that in drafting this piece of history, our founding fathers drew inspiration from the original residents of this land.
This is what got it going. This is what kicked it off.
I'm really glad that we got to see it because that's a real big piece of history and that we should all learn about.
What they may not know, though, is that much of the inspiration behind the words was the Iroquois Confederacy, now known as the Haudenosaunee.
I think it was 1988 when they did that. The House of Representatives concurred by the Senate, recognizing the contributions of the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations, Iroquois Confederacy, in regards to the formation of the United States, utilizing the way we functioned as a democratic form of government.
And while it's not an exact blueprint, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy provided a model for democracy with checks and balances, representation, and a system of governance that emphasized both persuasion and consensus.
The original 13 colonies were modeled after how we functioned as a group, as the Iroquois Confederacy.
In fact, the U.S. Great Seal features 13 arrows, a direct reference to the Haudenosaunee tradition of unity.
I think it was a real inspiration to our founding fathers because it was a group of nations that had been for much of their history at war with each other or at odds. And so for their ability to come together and find common ground and find unity and realize that they were stronger together than as individual nations, I think really inspired the founding fathers, especially during a time in which the colonies were very fractured.
And Buffalo City historian Lindsay Lauren Visser says the Great Law of Peace just points to the Haudenosaunee's laws, emphasizing peace, righteousness, and mutual support for the common good.
It's something that needs to be remembered. It's a part of history, and certainly, you know, where the United States has come and to where they are today, I think having a foundation of that from that time frame back in that day, moving forward and is still in existence today, is significant.
And speaking of Indigenous contributions, many know the game of lacrosse, cheer for the Bandits, maybe even play. But for the Indigenous people, it's more than just a sport. It's a gift from the Creator, something they call the medicine game.
And the game of lacrosse was played even before the creation of the earth in our stories. So when you hear that, you know, it really brings us back to the origins and understandings of what that means to the Haudenosaunee people and many Native nations, that it was with us even before this land was here, even before the waters were here, that we had a version and understanding of it.
The Creator gave us this game to honor Him with. So you play it with a good mind and a good heart.
It takes away all the pains, all the sorrows. You're just free for the day.
To me personally, I feel like it helps heal your mind, your body, and your soul.
But it's not only the game itself, it's about tradition, passed down through generations, like the art of stick making, picking out the right tree, usually hickory or ash, splitting the logs, steaming the wood to soften it, and then bending it in these metal forms. And then comes the fine woodworking to give the stick its final shape before the string goes in. It's important because a lacrosse stick is often the first thing a newborn receives. Rod made this miniature stick for his child, who was due any day when we spoke.
They feel the spirit of the game in them when they're born, so that will immediately go. Taking it to the hospital, putting it in his little crib, and he's going to have it just as soon as he's born. It's one of the first things he's going to have.
And just as promised, when Arenda Herring was born last month, the stick was with him. And it's fitting because for many, the game is a link between the past and the future.
It can be in the way of playing with your ancestors and your brothers and everybody that comes to play. And the camaraderie and love and spirit behind it, that's medicine.
And Dr. Rodney Herring knows a thing or two about medicine. He is also the chair of the Department of Indigenous Cancer Health at Roswell Park.
So when we play, he's happy. When we play, we're happy, and our communities are happy.
But he also believes that Western medicine and traditional beliefs can go hand in hand.
It could mean me going into the forest here to get wood to make lacrosse sticks. That's part of the medicine of being healthy and physical activity and being at one with your environment, understanding it. This is where it all brings us back to in our understandings and love for the game, is being here. This is who we are. And so I'll run through these woods here. And as I'm running, you know, that's part of like connecting, and I'll have my stick and I'll be playing, you know, dodging trees and cross-checking, and I'll be playing here in the woods. And it's really important to connect with that. And as I'm going through the forest, I'm looking at different trees. I'm looking at trees, not only ones that might be good for sticks, but I'm also looking for medicine. I'm also looking for good hunting spots. I'm also looking for good fishing spots. In the springtime, I may be looking for wild onions for our traditional soups. So it's all part of that, part of the game. That's part of the medicine of understanding who we are. That's part of the medicine of the game. So it isn't just what you see on the field. It's this. This is the game.
And from the field to the ice, and a brief period of time that saw North Tonawanda become the home of Buffalo's other pro hockey team, the Buffalo Norsemen. For Fred Hunt Jr., stepping through these doors was like stepping into a time machine.
Wow.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like 50 years.
All right. This unassuming building in North Tonawanda is now a community outreach center as well as a bus garage for the NT schools. But a half a century ago, it was the home of professional hockey and the Buffalo Norsemen of the North American Hockey League.
Well, everybody was excited, you know, a second professional team in Buffalo, and you know, Buffalo's a hot hockey town, and we really felt wanted here. It was fun to play here. It was. The fans were a little rowdy, and it was great.
This rare film of the Norsemen in action shows a packed house as they played an exhibition game in September of 1975 against the Sabres rookies. Mike Bellani was a reporter for the Tonawanda News at the time.
I was 20 years old, had just gotten out of college, and I had a full-time job at the Tonawanda News where I had worked during high school covering high school sports. And all of a sudden, the Buffalo Norsemen came to town, and it was big news, and we covered it like a big league team.
And now the story is getting new legs on the NT History blog from its founder, Dennis Reed Jr.
I grew up right around here. I grew up a slap shot, I guess you might say, away over on the avenues. And I never knew this building and this complex had hockey in it. I was a big hockey fan. I found out later. I thought, wow, what a great story.
Hollywood thought so, too. The North American Hockey League was the inspiration for the movie Slapshot, and several Norseman-related events found their way into the film, including a major brawl and a scene that Freddie Hunt Jr. remembers distinctly.
And I took a slap shot from outside the blue line, and he deflected it, and it went over into the stands above the organ player, hit the clock, and the clock came off the wall and came down on the organ player. And the Slapshot movie stole that. Instead of the clock, they just had him getting hit with a puck.
And he says that while the movie was a comedy, it really captured the spirit of minor league hockey in the early 70s.
That's old-time hockey, and that's how the leagues were. I mean, the minor leagues, like I played in Dayton, Ohio, and it was the same way. It was rough and tumble leagues. I mean, you earned your keep there.
Up next on the Unknown Stories, he was a man who went from industrialist to conservationist to visionary. A peek into the life of the namesake of Letchworth Park. Welcome back. One of the things that we take great pride here in Western New York is our natural beauty. And this morning, the unknown story of William Pryor Letchworth, a man who went from industrialist to environmentalist and whose vision gave us one of Western New York's natural treasures. When you think of the name Letchworth, images like this likely come to mind. The sights and sounds of Letchworth Park and, of course, the glorious Glen Iris Inn.
So this was the home of Mr. Letchworth.
But this brownfield on Tonawanda Street in Black Rock is what was left behind by William Pryor Letchworth's earlier life.
It's an interesting dichotomy, but obviously the later part of his life was much different than the earlier part of his life.
When Letchworth came to Buffalo in 1848, he became a partner in a firm called Pratt & Letchworth. The firm made saddlery hardware and other ironworks. The company expanded and included hand tools, toys, and most notably, railroad equipment. It was just a huge industrial complex. And then at the age of 46, Letchworth retired and turned his attention from industry to conservation. He first noticed this spectacular piece of Western New York as a tourist passing by on the train.
So he felt as though this was a beautiful area that was being harmed by the logging that was happening, and he wanted to save it, basically. So he bought it.
And in 1859, he purchased the home that would eventually become Glen Iris, along with 1,000 acres of land. He always believed in social consciousness for the good of society. He also became intrigued by the Native American culture that existed here. He collected artifacts and even had Mary Jemison's grave and cabin moved back to this ancestral land. Jemison was known as the White Woman of the Genesee, having been kidnapped as a child in a raid by Native Americans. She then chose to stay after being freed as an adult.
She actually married two different Native American men, had children, was assimilated into their culture, and lived in this area.
And after Mr. Letchworth's death, he left his land and property to New York State to be turned into a park, preserving these spectacular and spiritual lands as what we now know as the Grand Canyon of the East, Letchworth State Park. the legacy of a man who went from industrialist to conservationist to visionary.
The best thing to do here is to spend the night in the home of Mr. Letchworth and then sit on the front porch, listen to the sound of the falls with a drink in your hand and just relax and look at the stars and enjoy the natural beauty that he was able to preserve for people to enjoy.
And now on to another man who put his stamp on Queen City history, one of Buffalo's founding fathers, the village's first doctor, who was also a War of 1812 hero. This is a story about the birth of Buffalo.
I think every community in America has a man who really helped found the city.
And one of the men who played a vital role.
Cyrenius being the first physician, but he was more than a physician. I mean, he was a cantankerous fellow who believed his ideas strongly and had a lot of energy. He must have only slept about 4 hours a night.
His name, Cyrenius Chapin. He was born in Massachusetts and in 1803 moved west. He purchased land from the Holland Land Company in what was then known as the village of New Amsterdam.
He brought with him his experience as a doctor. He was apprentice trained, and so he had something to support himself, something to fall back on. But I think he saw here in Western New York was the potential for a great little community.
And he bought up a great chunk of that community. His home stood in the area of Swan and Washington, right where the ballpark stands today.
His first offer was to actually buy what today would have been all of downtown. But he ended up with just one lot and built a home, built an office, and stayed there the rest of his life.
And in those early days, his medical background wasn't the only thing he brought to the table. He also took on a role of community leadership.
Cyrenius was an officer in the New York State militia.
And he was an officer of conscience, which he showed during the War of 1812.
General McClure, who was then commanding the American forces at Fort George, decided that he had to burn the village of Newark, today we know as Niagara-on-the-Lake. And this was something that Chapin was very much against. As you can imagine, the only people left in the village of Niagara-on-the-Lake at that time in the war were women and children and older people, and he knew they were just going to be put out in the middle of the winter.
In fact, his protest was so strong that General George McClure ordered Chapin locked up. He was later freed by members of his militia, but not in time to stop the British retaliation.
They tested it by coming across at Fort Niagara and realized there was nobody defending Fort Niagara, and then started their march down to Buffalo, burning everything in sight, and including Buffalo, and including Dr. Chapin's home.
Dr. Chapin rebuilt his home and went on to start both the Erie County Medical Society and also the Agricultural Society, as well as the county fair. And now the story of another man who saved the lives of many people and the long overdue recognition that he recently received. On a recent morning in the Old First Ward, I met up with 3 generations of the Crosby family to talk about an event that celebrates a generation gone by.
Great-great-grandfather Stephen Barrett was an Irish immigrant back in 1833. He came over along with the other Irish immigrants looking for work in the canal building and the grain mills.
Kyle Crosby says his great-great-grandfather started his life, like many other Irish immigrants, on the shores of Lake Erie in a shanty community called the Island, or the Beach, and he worked hard to elevate his social standing.
He was a ferryman, a fisherman. He was also a harbor operator as well.
This journey of family discovery actually began with a clipping about the tragic end of Stephen Barrett's life.
I found a news article on him, and it was stated that he fell in the harbor and drowned back in 1898.
So that pushed Kyle to dive into his family's story a little deeper. And as he looked, like the ripples in the water of the Buffalo River, the articles just kept coming.
He was actually a real famous lifesaver at the time, who saved over 86 people from drowning in the Buffalo Harbor and recovered more than 200 bodies as a diver for what was then called the Volunteer Life-Saving Service, which was a precursor to our modern U.S. Coast Guard.
He found out that his great-great-granddad was a bona fide hero.
The list just goes on and on. There was dozens and dozens of articles talking about it.
He thought those heroics should be remembered and honored, so he contacted City Hall and ultimately got them to agree as well. On Sunday, this Trailblazers sign was unveiled on the approach to the Michigan Street Bridge, coincidentally in the shadow of a General Mills smokestack that still bears the name Crosby. Kyle hopes that this sign and his story will serve as an inspiration to others.
And hopefully people will be inspired by doing it and start looking in their own history and find some of their own amazing stories that they didn't know existed.
And one thing is for sure, Buffalo and Western New York is loaded with amazing stories, and that's exactly why we love to dive into these, the unknown stories of Western New York. I'm Pete Gallivan. Thanks for watching.